Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. We are still here in Bulgaria. You can see kind of the nice view out there. I've been traveling now since like the middle of May, so I'm feeling quite exhausted with travel. I have about another 3 weeks to go, and then I'm looking forward to just chilling and not being in the same place. Anyway, today we're going to discuss the subject of should you get a citizenship by investment? And obviously, every month, every year, we help people from all over the world to get citizenship by investment, to buy second passports, etc. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And so on the surface, I'm biased on this, but I try when I'm giving people advice to kind of set aside my own interests and be agnostic about what is the best solution and kind of give the best advice accordingly. So I'm going to try to do that here and kind of reflect for you. There's often times where I end up telling people, look, you probably shouldn't get it, even some people who are interested. And so we're going to talk about the people who almost certainly should get it, ones who maybe are in a situation where it's borderline, and then some who probably shouldn't get it. There isn't really a heck of a lot of point. So we're going to dive in and discuss that. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for your subscription. Thank you for supporting the channel. Very much appreciated. If you would like help, or if you're new here, like I said, I'm Michael from Offshore Citizen, and we help you with custom international solutions for both yourself and your business. So this means helping you to figure out what is the best strategy for you, both personally and for your business, and then implementing that strategy. And so we've got a team of people who work with us who help on the back end and deliver that, etc. So if you're interested in any of those things, you can feel free to reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay. So just really quickly, for those who aren't familiar, probably most people on the channel are, but what is citizenship by investment? First of all, citizenship by investment is largely a misnomer. Mostly it's citizenship by donation, right? You're usually paying money and getting a passport. And why would you do this? Well, because normally you'd have to go and live in a country, typically for 5 to 20 years, depending on the country. Almost no countries. There are a few exceptions. I've done a video you can go and check out on the fastest countries to get citizenship. And so there's a couple exceptions, but they're very rare. Most of them, it's 5 years plus to get citizenship living there. Usually this has some minimum stay requirement. Often there's a language requirement, etc. Whereas when you do citizenship by investment, CBI as we call it, or more accurately, citizenship by donation, you end up in a situation where you typically get citizenship within 6 months. And there's no physical presence requirement in most cases. There's some where you have to be there for 5 days or something like this. And you don't have to pass any language tests, etc. So for some people, this can be really excellent. At any given time, at the moment, there's approximately 10 countries in the world that are offering citizenship by investment programs, although really there's like 6 that I would say matter. And then the others are extreme outliers, okay? So let's put people into a group of categories of why people buy citizenship by investment programs. So the first I would say is they want to expand their access to the world, visa-free travel. This is especially common. I find we have a lot of clients from India who are like this, China, Africa. Those are probably the 3 most common regions. I guess certain parts of the Middle East as well, where frankly their passport is just really poor. And the hassles that somebody in the Western world might not appreciate, being born in a situation where you didn't have to do anything and you can just go to, for example, Europe visa-free, is not there. And suddenly they have to go through a lengthy visa process. Maybe they have to send their passport away. They're without it for a while. It's kind of a hassle. So by getting a better passport, they gain better access to the world. And I mean, in some cases, you're talking about almost no access to a pretty reasonable amount of access. Or in some cases, they already have maybe decent access, but they want to expand it in some ways. And in fact, this includes some people where, for example, maybe they're American or they're from some country that has a really good passport, but they maybe don't have access to a country like China. And they can get a passport that gives them access to China, and maybe you're doing a lot of business there, et cetera. It makes it easier. China, Russia, a few of these are kind of the outliers in that situation. The second group of people, I would say, are people who are looking to renounce their US citizenship. And so the basic fundamental is that, in order to get out of the US system, which there's a growing number of people who are wanting to leave, you need to have some other citizenship you can renounce onto. And so this facilitates that process, and we help people with that each year as well. The third group of people are those who just want a plan B. There's some sort of backup. They're concerned about risks in the world. And this, I would say, represents a pretty high share of the global population who might be interested in that. So that's kind of the three categories of people that I see, or at least the reasons that tend to make sense for somebody to get a second citizenship via a citizenship by investment scheme. Now, the costs for this are generally, the majority of them fall within, $100 to $180, well, let's call it $113 to $180,000 all inclusive. That's the majority. Then there's some outliers, like you have Malta. We work with that one too, and you're talking about typically over 900,000 euros for doing that one. And then you have sort of Turkey, where you can buy some real estate and get citizenship fairly quickly. And there's very low to no, it's minimal legal costs. It's just a question of getting property. So you have the spectrum available to you, okay? But I do think it's important to understand the costs, because to me, depending on which of these you're looking at, there's a different exchange, right? So I think the cost causes us to go into a second set of categorization when I build a mental model to think about it. And this is partially, what's the money worth to you, right? If you have, $150,000 and you're going to spend 114 grand getting a Caribbean passport, well, realistically, that's a pretty substantial cost to you, right? Maybe that money is money that provides a safety net for you. Maybe it would allow you to get set up with a home somewhere else. Maybe it's an investment for the future, etc., right? So the cost is fairly high. On the other hand, if you have $20 million, well then, you're talking about 0.5% of your net worth or something, and the impact is lower. So that's, I think, one element. Then the other is, what is your global perspective? Some people think, look, all things considered, I want to stay where I'm staying for the rest of my life, and maybe at some point in the future there's like an outlier event where I would go, but I'm pretty happy here. Other people want to travel a lot, they want to see the world, maybe they don't really like the country they're in, they're planning on going out anyway. Now the reality is that if you've got a good passport and you want to relocate, you can just get a residency permit in a lot of parts of the world. There's some cases where it's useful to have one of these, and so a good example of this is if you're talking about Malta. Malta is an EU country, so it gives you access to the whole EU, and frankly, it's difficult to use different visa programs to get into certain countries. So if one of the countries that you want to go into is one of those countries, well, Malta actually, in some senses, might be an easier path to getting in there than actually going and trying to work through one of their conventional programs. So there are some trade-offs in terms of the flexibility, etc. So what is the advice that I would give? First of all, I would say, broadly speaking, if you are quite wealthy, so let's call it $20 million plus in net worth, I think generally speaking, it's smart for pretty much everybody to have a second citizenship in that case. Now, one way of doing that is by paying for a citizenship by investment program. Another is maybe you've already got it through citizenship by descent. Another is maybe you're in a situation where you're going to go live in another country and gradually get it. But the way that I look at it is as an insurance policy. And so if I'm sitting there with $20 million of net worth, and I can pay 0.5% of my net worth as a lifetime insurance policy, that's pretty good. It's like the ROI is fairly small, and it could be much, much smaller if I'm talking about if I have $100 million or whatever the number is. So for people who are watching who are very wealthy, I would say if you haven't gotten it, it's kind of crazy not to, because the what if is such a small cost that you might as well go ahead with it, right? And by the way, you could end up in a situation where maybe you think, okay, well, I could get it whenever I need it in the future. The problem is, what happens if there's some extreme event that takes place and suddenly for some random reason you end up with a criminal record? I can tell you about a bunch of people who really, through more or less no fault of their own, ended up in a situation where that could prevent them from getting one of these programs. And so it's better to have it in advance than later, right? On the flip side, I think if you are fairly well off and you're in a country that has poor visa-free access and you want to be accessing the world, just probably from an ease of life perspective, there's a sufficient ROI, right? So I don't know, this is what's called the millionaires. Millionaires, in my opinion, from countries like India, like various countries in Africa, say Nigeria, et cetera, who are interested in being globally mobile. Probably over time, there's a fairly significant payoff there. Now, obviously it's more expensive if you're going to go and pay for Malta or something. I'll talk about that maybe separately in a second. But I think in general, it's a one-time investment that's going to be passed on to your kids, your grandkids, et cetera. Gives you this global mobility. It's probably a reasonable ROI given the direction the world is headed in. Okay. Now, on the flip side, what if we're looking at it and we're saying, you know what? I'm somewhere in between, right? Obviously, Americans who want to renounce, that's just a no-brainer. Like you have to go and do something, and so you're gonna pick. I think for a lot of people, if you have a good passport, in most cases, and your net worth is not super high, right? So let's just say it's in the low millions so 6 figures to low 7 figures, right? That's kind of where your net worth lies. And you have a good passport already. So this is Western Europe, this is Japan, this is South Korea, this is Singapore, this is potentially parts of Latin America, depending on which part of the world you want to access, etc. I think that it's hard to make a case that you should be expending a lot of resources on this, unless there's some particular reason to worry about kind of the plan B backup. The truth is that you have a pretty good passport, you're probably going to have that pretty good passport long term, you're probably not going to gain something. So in other words, you're spending $100 and whatever $1,000 plus for an option that you will probably not take advantage of. So, what's the sense of doing that, right? The opportunity cost is probably greater. Now, I think that I would say if you're taking that money and you're investing and you happen to grow your wealth and you reach a point where I mentioned, you have extremely high net worth, whatever that number happens to be for you, right? I mentioned arbitrarily 20 million, maybe it's 15, maybe it's whatever the number happens to be. But the point is that the value of that money to you is very small. Then look, at that point your situation changes, you probably should go and get one because the backup is worth it. The cost of insurance is worth it, right? If you just think like, what do you pay for insurance on your house as a percentage of the value of the house, right? It's probably somewhere around, 0.75% or something would be a typical insurance cost in a lot of places. Probably a bit lower than that, but I mean, depending on the country, right? Depending on where you are, et cetera. But that's per year, right? Here you're talking about a one-time, lifetime insurance policy, so that's pretty good. Now, on the other hand, maybe you're in a situation where you really, really want to have access for future generations. This is where something like Malta comes in, right? Because the thing about a passport like Malta is it's quite different than, say, a Caribbean passport. Why? Well, you can live in a bunch of these countries. You get access, because the thing is, if you get a Caribbean passport, what do you not get with that? You don't get access to Canada, you don't get access to the US, you don't get access to Japan, you don't get access to Mexico, you don't get access to Australia or New Zealand. There's some parts that you still have to go and get into, right? So there's a marginal differential that is different with Malta. Now, is it worth, 6 times more for Malta? For most people, not, right? But imagine that you're in a situation where you say, okay, well, I could choose Malta, or I could choose one of these other ones. Yeah, it's a big hit, right? It's a big hit. Even if you have $10 million, I mean, you're talking about 10% of your net worth. It's hard to justify that. But imagine, okay, well, I'm going to live in Europe maybe, so that's one thing, I have this access. Number 2, my kids can potentially go to university there, and this could potentially save a lot of money. If you just think about the university cost of tuition in some place like the US, I mean, my one assistant was doing her master's in international tax at Georgetown. I think it was $70,000 for her to go and do this training, right, for 1 year. It's nuts. If you kind of extrapolate that out, you've got maybe a few kids, you're like, all right, well, just the cost savings that I may get in university by being able to send them to, Germany or something like that, may actually have a sensible ROI to it. So you can play around accordingly. But I guess to sum up, I would say, if you're very high net worth, it's just kind of a no-brainer. Then it just becomes a question of which program you're going to go with, depending on what makes the most sense to you. If you're somebody who is not in a country that has a good passport, but you've got reasonable wealth, then probably makes sense. If you don't have the reasonable wealth, maybe the opportunity cost is too great. I don't know what that crossover point is for you. It's obviously going to be personal. It's probably got to be at least $500,000 or something, because if you're talking about giving up I don't know, some substantial share of your net worth, let's call it, greater than 25%, it's pretty hard to justify, right? Then we can go over and we can say, let's look at, for people who are in the middle, I think often those people probably are not, it's not that important to it. Now, obviously, if somebody just likes collecting, there are some people I know who just like collecting passports. They've got 5, 6 passports. Okay, great, that's your thing. Cool, great. But I think for most people who are not in either of those situations, it probably makes sense for you to hold off and invest elsewhere. And then when your life circumstances change, go there. The exception obviously being if there's some really specific reason that you think, hey, listen, there could be some problems. But in most cases, I think what you'll find is that it's easier simply to leave and go and get residency somewhere else, have that residency permit working towards something. And I think that's a very smart idea in general. I think for a lot of people who are not in a situation where they're doing citizenship by investment, they probably should have a second residency, ideally one that could be working towards at least having some time moving towards some alternative. It gives you optionality, it enriches your life to go to that other place. It's relatively low cost. Again, I just think about the cost of insurance relative to your income and your net worth, and you can make decisions accordingly. So those would be my opinions. If you want help with that, like I said, we help people all the time with getting the second passports, and so happy to help you. I would love to be the one who assists you with it. Obviously, there's lots out there who can do it as well. And if you have your own comments, put them in the comments below. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.